I'd like to call the meeting of the Atherton City Council to order November 6th, 3 p.m. We have the roll call, please.
Yes, Councilmember DeGolio.
Yep.
Councilmember Holland. Councilmember Whitmer.
Yep.
Vice Mayor Lewis.
Here,
And we'll note for the record that Mayor Hawkins is absent.
great. Thank you very much. So we have 3 items on the agenda and it's very dense. There's a lot of information that everyone has been given from Mr. Robert Ovadia. Thank you so much for all your hard work. The first item is to review and discuss the contractual refuse rate adjustments for January 2025 and the potential use of the town's rate stabilization fund or franchise fee to offset the increase. George, you want to kind of kick it off a little bit, but I know that we have our subcommittee of the waste management with us today.
Yeah, we met with George.
You
George
did?
knows.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Good. Okay, great.
Thank you, Madam Vice Mayor, members of the council. As you know, Green Waste Recovery holds a franchise with the town for the collection and processing of solid waste materials and recyclables. Section 13.2 of that franchise agreement prescribes a series of compensation adjustments over the term of the franchise, and it's sort of front-loaded. They're larger at the beginning, and they translate to CPI from 2029 and beyond. And the larger adjustments were in part to account for the town's exit strategy from the SBWMA when we transferred from Recology to Green Waste. We had a substantial rate stabilization fund at the very beginning of that exit. However, the exit fee was higher than the amount in the rate stabilization fund. So in negotiations with Green Waste, they stepped up and paid a portion of that, and then is collecting some of that back through the overall franchise. And the money that they've returned back to the town to offset some of that, we put back into our rate stabilization fund. However, the increases, as are noted in the staff report on page 1, are, in 2024, 2025, and 2026 are 11% per year. So the subcommittee discussed with Green Waste to kind of lower those. And there was a few options that they discussed. Option 1 was for the town to use the rate stabilization fund to offset those increases, whereas Green Waste would get their compensation amount, but the actual effective rate increase to the residents would be less because we'd be offsetting it with our rate stabilization fund. Option 2 was to figure out some way to reduce maybe our franchise fee, which is 10%, which is about $420 some odd thousand a year to the town in general fund revenue. Reduce that as a way to offset some of those increases over the next couple of years. Also incorporate a full rate recovery or full cost recovery for the excess bins. And that amounts to about a 2% increase for some of those excess green bins that we would factor in there as well, or some combination of all of those.
And blue.
And blue bin, or some combination of all of those. But bring the rates to full cost recovery first, and then apply the adjustments as are approved by the council. So you've got a couple of attachments. One of the attachments is a presentation from Green Waste that they provided to the subcommittee. But then attachment 3 are the 2 options that the rate committee, that the refuse committee discussed. The first page of that is the financial impacts of those. But the second 2 pages, page 2 is the rate adjustment with no franchise fee reduction. This was option 1. And as you look at it, there's a yellow column there on the left where it says authorized increase, 11%, 8%, 8%, 8%, drops down to 6, 5, 4, and 3. In this option, there's no reduction in the franchise fee, and there is the cost recovery that's imposed in year 1, but the net difference is taken from the rate stabilization fund on the far right. So that goes from the 537,000 down to around 7,000 a few years out. So the effective rate increase to the resident is what's in the yellow column. That's page 2. Page 3 is option 2, which does reduce the town's franchise fee from 10% down to 5%. And the effective rate increases in the yellow column are less to the resident. And the franchise fee is reduced to 5%, so it's cut in half. The revenue to the town is cut in half. And the rate stabilization fund is also still used to offset some of that increase, but it doesn't go down as far. So when you go back to page 1, the question was, well, what's the impact of reducing our franchise fee on our general fund? Because it's $400 and something thousand a year to general fund revenue that we use for streets and roads and other operational costs. The top table shows that over the course of 5 years, that franchise fee revenue is about $2.5 million. So if it's reduced in half, that second table shows it at $1.3 million. So that's a net difference of just over $1 million. But so what's the impact on our unallocated general fund balance, which is that money that we've got to spend towards CIP projects and others? Looking at the 50% reduction, it's not significant, but it is noticeable. It's you still end up with in fiscal year 28, 29, somewhere around 25 million in that unallocated fund balance. And again, those are just projections based on projected revenue for the town's budget that we did back in June. So the subcommittee's here to answer any detailed questions about their analysis of this. The numbers are a discussion of what kind of adjustments you want the community to feel. There is another alternative that I think I mentioned to Councilmember Widmer. I don't know if I mentioned it to Councilmember DeGolia. And that was, we could do, leave the franchise fee the way it is and reduce and just tag the rate stabilization fund. But every year, the solid waste committee meets with green waste and we talk about what the contractual rate adjustment is, what effective rate we want to do. And then if we want to come up with a difference, we could allocate money, much like we do to our insurance fund, 100,000 or 200,000 into our rate stabilization fund to keep it at zero so that it balances out every year instead of going up and down. So that's another option to consider too.
So that last option, while it's a viable option, we don't know what the future is going to have, and I don't want to be taking money and putting it in out of the general fund in there every year. Now we have two. The reason we got into this is that I've heard from a number of residents about the 11% increase. Having 11% increases was probably going to cause more problems. Although our rates are lower than our nearest similar neighborhood in Hillsborough by about $25 for the small carts. So, because I've gone back and I've looked at all their stuff that's online. So we came up with, changing those numbers, as you can see, in the, I guess the table that has the yellow.
Well, there's two tables. Are you talking about option
Table
one
that
or
has the
option two?
yellow.
Well, there's two tables
Oh,
with
that's
yellow.
Okay, well, the first one was go down to,
Our recommendation is the second table.
Option two.
Yes.
Yeah.
The non,
Franchise
which-
fee reduced to
Non-franchise fee.
5%.
Which takes 50% of the franchise fee and uses it toward the authorized increase, the contractual increase. And I'd say the reason for that is exactly what Bill said. Two things. One, what Bill said, which is reducing these rate increases of 11%, 11%, and 8%, which are rather high. And the town is in pretty good shape because we have a surplus. So that makes sense to us to use some of that franchise fee. It doesn't mean that we have to leave the franchise fee forever at 5%. We're going to have a contractual discussion with them at some point and we can deal with that then. But I think that transparency is extremely important here. And having the rate stabilization fund is something that nobody looks at. We're the only people that look at it. Everybody looks at the general fund and whether we've got a surplus or a detriment each year in that fund. And we'd rather keep it that way and minimize the rate stabilization fund, which is hidden.
and the rate stabilization fund would be something that we'd be using over time. I'm sure there'll be another time we want to do it.
And-
And The only issue with the franchise fee is should the council decide at one time to raise it back to 10%, then we need to do a Prop 218.
Notice.
Just, yeah.
Sure. So I have a question about the rate stabilization fund. In the past, we have used our rate stabilization fund in the past, like down to like zero, and then it kind of built itself
No,
back up.
no, we haven't.
It wasn't.
It
down
was-
to
Never
zero.
got down that low.
it
Actually,
was-
it kept growing and growing and growing to where it was
No, but
almost.
we
$2
used
million.
it at the contractual discussion.
It was zeroed out at the time we transferred to
Right.
green waste, and then it was replenished over a couple of years.
But during the 10 years with Recology, we never tapped it.
Correct.
Instead, when we needed to get additional money,
Out
we
of
went,
Recology.
we went out to, yeah.
Right.
But, well, we also used, when we grew, when we had costs that went up, if you remember, we raised the green rates, the excess green cards, which
Mhm.
we're doing here, but that's what we did. And we kept the rate stabilization fund the same, and then it just kept growing.
Can we kind of come back and talk about charging residents who use over and above the normal amount
Yeah.
of green and, you know, at a rate that they pay for?
Well,
rather than-
That's the
it's a
2%.
really good question, and it's something we went into a great amount of detail on.
Mhm.
The challenge is you can't charge people more than the cost of that service. So what we said was the first thing we want to do is look at those excess bins. That's green bins in excess of 2 and blue bins in excess of 1,
Mhm.
and see if we're charging residents 100% of the cost of managing those bins. And we determined that we're charging them a little less than 100% of the cost. So there's a little bit of subsidization for that excess. So that's the first thing we're proposing to eliminate. We're going to raise the rate on those excess bins until it matches the cost.
Okay,
And then we'll raise the rates for everyone, excess bins and regular, by
by a certain
by
percentage.
whatever percentage we agree to.
Well, I think that's only fair.
Is it also for excess black bins? Like if
No, if
people-
you
There
get an
aren't-
extra
there
black
aren't
bin, you
excess
pay-
black
You
bins.
pay for that
That's separate.
separately. You do
Yeah.
pay for 2 black bins directly, but we've always had, the green bins, and we subsidize a certain rate there, which Recology or Green Waste is charging, but we want to raise it. Because when you have multiple green bins, like somebody has 15 to 20,
Yeah.
Yeah.
that fills up the truck and it makes the truck drive all the way down to South San Jose, then come back. And so there's a cost associated with that.
Yeah.
That they have that's driving their cost up. So we
So-
think it's very.
Makes sense to me,
Yeah,
yeah.
like we've
There
always
aren't
said.
excess black bins. The way it works on the black bin is they price out there's 3 different sizes of black bins and they price them out differently based on how much they are. And if you have a second black bin, you just pay twice what that bin
Right.
would have been.
That's
Okay.
correct.
And it's not subsidized.
It's not subsidized, no. That's
Well,
fully
it's what
paid.
the fee is that we've determined with green waste.
But and the fee is our negotiated fee with Green Waste. If we went forward with that fee, we'd have an 11% raise in each of the next 2 years and then an 8% raise. And we think that's too much. We're trying to avoid an 11% raise.
Yeah, but that
Just
was
by,
part of
by
the,
smoothing it out.
right.
They would still get the compensation of the 11% increase, but the effective rate to the resident would be smoothed out over time.
That's correct.
But that was our contract.
That's
that we
correct.
signed,
The contract was
correct.
11%
Yeah.
this year, next year, and the year after.
which was harsh.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's why, but it was because they were reimbursing us with what we spent to get out of the contract. So we had a rate stabilization fund.
They had to buy trucks to take over our service and
Mhm.
the 1312 obligations are expensive. So we knew there were costs coming and Recology's costs are even more. So we made a good move to switch to green waste. It's cheaper for our residents.
Even with the 11% increases over the next 3 years, we made a good deal. It's just that 11% gets your notice.
Yeah, and it's expensive.
And we think we're in a position where we could forego half of that franchise fee.
But that hits our bottom line. I mean,
Yeah, that
our
cuts
revenue,
in,
yeah.
that takes some
2%
revenue away from the general
420,000
fund.
to 210, is that what you're
And
recommending?
it changes each year. It's 10%. So by the end of the contract, it would have been 600,000, not because their revenue's going up and the franchise fee's
But-
10%.
But if you look at the last line on chart number 1,
Okay,
okay? The
Option
fiscal year 28, 29, the difference is in that year, $300,000. 300,150
He's
some
looking
odd
at the
dollars.
unallocated general fund balance
looking
line.
at this
Yeah.
page.
Yes.
So
Not
it's
option.
minimal. It really is minimal when you're looking at it, and it pales in comparison to the total number of $25,600,000.
Mhm.
Can I ask how many people complained about the 11% increase? Because I asked George, like, what does that mean from 11% of a normal bill? What does that mean? And it's $22 a month difference. So, which I think most Atherton residents probably wouldn't even notice a $20 a month difference on their bill. I mean, there
Well,
are people who will notice, and I'm just curious, like.
First off,
Wait, no, Bill, I'm not done yet. $1 million for our general fund is a lot of capital improvement projects. And I think a lot of people would probably rather see people spend money on fixing our drainage problems. Like when we had our CIP budget meeting earlier this year, we had to delay some of our CIP projects because we were going to zero out our general fund with our, just the priorities we've already identified. And so I'm just wondering how necessary this is. I appreciate that 11% feels like a lot, but $20 a month is not a lot. So I'm struggling with the necessity of this.
First
I
off,
think that your analysis is good, but $1 million for our budget is actually a lot of money from my perspective.
well, when you get out to the out years, it's 300,000. If you look
A
at chart
year.
1.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but it's an average of 250,000 a
And-
year
and-
is the way to look at it.
And you're not looking at 11%, you're looking at a 33% over 3 years. Okay? It's not, it's
I think
11,
that
we
was
had 11 this
the
year, then,
cumulative of 11, 11, 11, so that's a
Yeah.
30% increase over 3 years. And that would be noticeable. I mean, it's creep.
And just for clarity though, to address your other point there, that unallocated general fund balance where it does tick up, the
Yeah.
only year where we've allocated a substantial amount of money to our CIP is in fiscal year 24, 25. Those future out years, that doesn't include the $5, $6 or so million or so that you may want to allocate toward those given years' CIP projects. So if you do that in each of those respective out years, that 25 million is not going to be 25 million.
Yeah. I just think we in January are going to be talking about El Camino drainage solutions, which I assume is going to be like very expensive. And so like for my money, I would rather we spend it on that versus softening the impact of what it sounds like is a regionally cheaper garbage solution anyways for Atherton residents who, for the most part, I don't think need it. So
Well,
you know.
so I think that's a fair comment. And if we decided to leave the franchise fee where it is and just go with the contractual amount, I could accept it. I think the reason to make the change isn't for the average Atherton resident.
Yeah.
I think it's for the Atherton residents that are living on Social Security,
Mhm.
which I think there are not an irrelevant number of. I think that there's in the hundreds of people that are at that place. And for the smallest bin, that's a $13 a month increase
Mhm.
over the contract. So I think that's, and for the bigger bins, it's obviously more than that.
Okay.
So the only reason I think that personally, I think this is a good thing to consider is that we've got a fairly substantial surplus. And yes, if you run all the numbers through all the years, if we were to spend all that money, then we would get that surplus down to zero, but we've never spent all that money. So I'm not really worried about that. every year we don't spend lots of money and it gets rolled forward. So
So can we take some public comment on this
sure.
at this time? Are there any members of the public that would like to talk about the the green waste contract? Any member online, Anthony?
Check you now.
Okay. If
And
not-
just, you do have Tracy Adams, who's here from Green Waste, if you do have any
Oh.
questions of Green Waste.
Okay.
If
Did you
he's
want
just here
to
for
say
questions.
I was
something?
simply here if there was any questions.
Okay.
I don't have any statements. Like,
So,
Any question, Mr. Whitmer, for him?
no, I just wanted to point out again, so there's really three options. I mean, we can just go with the 11% every year and then have people come and talk about it. Or we have the one that doesn't touch the franchise agreement or franchise fee and one that does. Our recommendation is that we share the franchise fee, which I'm not sure a lot of people in town know, that we tack on an extra 10% to their fee.
Mhm.
And if they knew that, they might want to make a complaint about that too.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
I think it's important that in both cases, we maintain some rate stabilization funds because there are out year improvements. And I have talked to people about, why don't we have one big increase and then have no increases like we did with Recology.
Mhm.
But the consensus is, no, a small number each year is very acceptable. People expect prices to go up year on year, but they don't expect them to go dramatically.
So I have to agree perspective-wise about not every resident in Atherton doesn't pay attention to their, nickels and pennies and looks at their bills all the time. And I have received, even from, people who are very well off, comments that they feel that their garbage bills are pretty high, and I think that if we can do this in a way that minimizes the impact on the town's revenue stream, if you will. And I think Mr. Whitmer has a really good point that a lot of people don't realize that we are attacking on 10% onto their bill, which ultimately they're paying for, right? So if we can roll that back a little bit, I think it shows good faith that we're really trying to manage the contracts that we've gone through this before in the past, and I think it works out well if we can do that. So are we going to take a motion and direction at this
You just
time? I
need
think it's
to-
just review and
Just to
discuss.
give staff some direction, there's some contractual changes
Yeah.
and other things we would need to do.
Exactly.
We also need to initiate a 218 process for to bring things up
Excess
to
bins.
food cost recovery.
Yeah.
That'll happen in January, February, but we got to put notice out. So we'll be working with Green Waste to identify exactly what bins and what those rates would be. So it'll come back to you probably either November or December, but definitely in January, February for the rate adjustments.
Okay,
But I need to know which way you support tonight.
Yeah, we'll go with the franchise fee, I think was our recommendation.
yes,
Um,
that option
and
too.
I think that's the best.
Okay. Stacy, you going to be okay with that?
I mean, I wish there were alternatives to maybe helping the people who need it and not having this be for everybody. But have a relief program for someone who need it, or I don't know. But you guys are the majority, so.
Well, I just want to make sure that we are taking action to, and you've assured me that we are already, that people that use excess bins, that they're somehow not getting subsidy from us, but it's the actual cost recovery. I don't know how Recology can figure that out. You
Green
know
waste,
what I
green
mean?
waste.
Green
Green waste,
waste,
you know,
because-
part of it is in
We
analysis.
rely on them to tell us.
Yeah,
Yeah, I
Okay.
mean, yes, the truck has to stop at the same location and move up by picking up at different bins, but it fills up faster. There's more stuff that goes in the ground
Yeah.
faster,
yeah.
so you know,
Yeah.
it's a little bit of here, a little bit there, and things like that. So it's
And
kind of an estimate of 2%, we think is the right number, talking with them, and they've agreed.
Okay.
At the end of the day, I mean, from a waste management perspective, we'd like to motivate people to compost more. Right? I mean,
Exactly, on their
ultimately,
land.
Yeah, on their land rather than increase
Hauling
the
it
number of
away.
green bins and having all of us pay for it to be hauled away.
That might
So-
be some kind of a, town program that the Environmental Programs Committee can tackle and
That'd be a great thing for Earth Day.
Yeah.
Valerie
mean,
Gardner is
Yeah.
a really big advocate for that. All right, so
All right.
do
I have
we have,
direction.
you have the direction?
Thank you.
Okay, let's move on.
Yep.
Thank you for being here to answer questions. You brought it one so quick. Item number 2 is it's going to be a report from our Public Works Director.
Thanks for
Robert
coming.
Ovadia. It's recommended that council receive a presentation on the El Camino Real Complete Streets Study and provide feedback on the assessment of the various cross sections developed and proposed alternatives for further evaluation. So I just wanted to, this is a very big report you have going here.
Well, I have help,
You do?
yes.
All
So I'm
those in-
gonna recognize some
Great,
of them.
good.
So we have with us tonight Douglas Kim, who is our project manager. And then Carolyn Mirando, who is with the Transportation Authority, who is our funding partner and managing a team of consultants. On the line, we have Michaela Sword from WSP, who is the prime consultant. And then we also have Andrew Lee from Parametrics here with us. And we're going to kind of rotate through presentation. You should have received a copy and it's up on the board here. If you can put that in.
And is Parametrics a consultant to us?
They are a sub-consultant to WSP.
I see.
And so they're doing some of the technical work. Next slide. So just, I'm gonna highlight some of the background on the project, give an overview, highlight some existing conditions, and then Doug will give an overview of the public engagement process.
Mhm.
And then it'll be handed off to Andrew, who will talk about some of the alternatives. And then it'll be coming back to me to talk about next steps and help answer any questions and get feedback from you as to which directions we want to, which alternatives we want to evaluate further. So Anthony, next 2 slides. There you go. I think you all are familiar with El Camino Real. The portions within the town that don't have any dedicated bicycle and pedestrian facilities. A reminder, El Camino Real is a state highway under the purview of Caltrans. So anything that happens on the state highway has to be approved by the state. And then a reminder that we have a substantial grant from the Transportation Authority to help us do this evaluation.
You said substantial grant. Can you put a little parameter? What does substantial grant look like?
450,000?
That's
Would you call that substantial?
pretty substantial.
Not based on what needs to be done.
Well, this is just the
the
study.
Of what we can do. Next slide, please, Anthony.
52% of the,
So a reminder of the goal, and that is to try and make El Camino Real a complete street where we are accommodating users of all ages and abilities, and the various modes of transportation, including walking, biking, vehicles, transit, people with assisted mobility, et cetera. And so what we want to do is try and figure out a safe way for that to happen. And so just highlighting some policy support, that we have identified the need for improvement of El Camino Real in our Bike and Ped Master Plan. It also provides linkages to our side streets, whether that be Selby or Atherton, Valparaiso, et cetera. And so it's a good linkage for those routes. It's also been identified in countywide documents in terms of the countywide transportation plan, the CCAG Comprehensive Bike and Pedestrian Plan, the Grand Boulevard Initiative, and then also identified on state and regional documents. Next slide.
So on this, you've shown going from Valparaiso essentially all the way to Selby. But all that isn't ours.
I'll be highlighting that right now.
Okay.
So the study area is from basically limit to limit on our jurisdiction, north of Selby to Valparaiso. As Councilmember Whitmer noted, not all of that is in town jurisdiction. So in the northern portion, we have one side of the road, the other side is unincorporated San Mateo County. As we go to the south end, the full width of the roadway is actually in Menlo Park.
Yeah.
And so
Beginning when?
I believe
I believe it's Menlo
Alejandro?
College.
Menlo
right
College?
near Alejandro.
It's Alejandro,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Right.
So next.
Well,
slide.
the eastern side is Menlo Park all the way to Watkins.
To Watkins.
Yeah.
or
Yeah,
county.
and then, so the eastern side is all the way to Watkins, but then there's a jog in the middle, and then the full width actually ends up being within Menlo Park, fronting Menlo College. Next slide.
Right, right.
And so in another slide, I'll be talking about that we are actually
But then when you
partnering.
turn on Valparaiso, it's Atherton, is that side of
Half the
the,
street is.
that corner, like,
Atherton.
half that corner is, okay, interesting.
Yeah. That's very
So,
strange.
we are partnering with our neighbors, and, I'll highlight it in a second, that some of them are actually contributing funds to the project as well.
Okay.
And so again, we're trying to provide a high quality, continuous walking and biking experience on the
I
route
hope so.
to improve community, connectivity within and through the community. Improving street crossings, access to transit, addressing safety concerns, both for the modes of transportation that don't have it. In this picture here, you see somebody kind of walking in the shoulder.
Mhm.
I do that all the time.
You see it all the time, and it's not exactly the safest thing on the highway with traffic volumes and speeds as they are. But we want to do this in a way that minimizes impacts to the loop. So next slide. So funding sources, again, we have the grant from the Transportation Authority. We have our matching funds that we have committed, and part of that is in lieu fees. So what we are paying our project manager is contributed as part of our local match. The city of Menlo Park has contributed some funds, as well as Samtrans has contributed some funds to this. Our other partners, as we had as we kind of discussed, are County of San Mateo, which has jurisdictional oversight over certain areas. Caltrans, which owns the roadway, it has to approve everything. And then at the north end, we are tying in to Redwood City.
But the financial sources are in the upper group, and
That's
can you give what the relative amount is that Atherton versus Menlo Park
Let's
is
see, if I
contributing?
recall correctly, our initial contribution was about 50. When the pricing came in for the consultant services, it was short. Our funds of the grant were quite a bit short. So we upped it to a total of, I believe, 70,000 for our share. Samtrans, I believe, kicked in about 100,000. And then Menlo Park about 30,000. So.
But I'd say about a quarter of the space of that road is owned by some other jurisdiction. 1/4. So we should only be paying 3/4, 75%.
That's what we are.
We are. So if we're paying 70 and Samtrans is paying 100 and the TA is paying 500 and then Menlo Park's paying another 30, I think that we're,
What about the county?
at this point, the county is not a financial contributor. Again, this is a planning
We're
study.
paying 10%.
Yeah, there should be at least 10%, if not 15.
So this planning study is being done. There are future phases that will take this. And as you had indicated, the cost of improvement are going to be substantially more than we're paying for the study.
Yeah.
So we kicked off this project in the spring, doing existing condition evaluations and public outreach. And Doug will be highlighting the public outreach efforts. We're right now in the fall, and we've created concepts for evaluation. We're seeking your feedback tonight to make sure that we're picking the right ones to take further down the road. And then with the goal of coming back around March with preferred alternative for your blessing for the final report. And so that'll be based on the analysis of those alternatives, as well as the feedback that we get through our next phase of public outreach.
So next slide. So again, this is kind of where we are now. We've done the preliminary stuff, and we're here trying to pick the top 3 or 4 alternatives. You have the full range of alternatives as an attachment to your staff report. And then I think at this point, I'm handing it over, Doug. Go ahead, Anthony.
Yeah, so everyone here knows what El Camino is like and what's working and what's not working. But we also know, based on this conversation, it's not just any 1.5 mile stretch of El Camino. You've got 3 jurisdictions that care about what we're doing here. So what we wanted to do is to document and quantify what's happening, what's out there in terms of existing conditions. So you know that it sort of varies between 2 and 3 lanes in each direction. We wanted to identify where that happens, because eventually the work we're going to be showing you, not today, but later, is going to have to deal with all of the complexities that happen on a street like El Camino. We want to document the sort of width as it sort of undulates in and out, location of sidewalks, parking, mostly fronting the North Fair Oaks part of Redwood City, but also along the northbound side of Menlo Park, transit with the Samtrans stops, all of the signals, both in Atherton and also in Menlo Park, and the Hawk beacons, the ones that we know we have in Atherton. In terms of identifying what's happening out there, we did count 36,000 vehicles over a 24-hour period on average. That's thousands of vehicles during the peak hour. It's sort of what we know. Now, what's interesting about that is that over half of the vehicles, both northbound and southbound, are actually only traveling up to 5 miles. So these are Atherton residents going to Menlo Park or going to Redwood City. And the reason why that's important is because if we do boost up our bike and ped facilities, particularly the bike facilities, you have a chance of capturing some of those shorter trips. They're ideally 2, 3, 4 miles. Transit, of course, is provided by Samtrans. So we want to document not only where the stops are, but the condition of them. If you're in a wheelchair, if you're disabled, there isn't always a safe path to getting to the bus stop. So that's an area, that's a problem that needs to be fixed. Also, we wanted to document the fact that El Camino is considered a high injury network. We know about some some publicized collisions and fatalities on El Camino. Those are real, and we heard about that from neighbors. That's part of the problem we're trying to solve here with this project. Next slide. So over the spring and early summer, we had a pretty extensive outreach process. A lot of you were witness to some of that. What we wanted to do is we had several objectives. We wanted to reach out and ask the public, this is what we're seeing in terms of the measurables. What are you seeing as residents, as visitors, as people who use the corridor? And we heard some insights. I wouldn't say we heard anything that was a real surprise, because we were aware of what's going on, but residents let us know what was important to them, and I'll be talking about that in a second. We wanted to also just answer questions about what the study is and what it isn't. We had people on Earth Day saying, when's this thing going to get built? Without even knowing what what we're thinking about. So we wanted to set expectations right. In terms of engagement tactics, we have a homepage on the Atherton website that answers questions and is just a portal for people to get information and tell us what they think. We provided a multilingual fact sheet and FAQ that has been sort of the backbone of all of our outreach. In the Athertonian, in the summer edition, we let all of our residents know about the study that's happening, and we try to drive people to get onto our website and participate in the online survey about what's important to you and what do you think needs to be fixed. We also gave an interactive map that said, point out exactly where you think the problem spots are along El Camino. We got 320 responses. Not all of them were residents because it's on the web, but you'll hear. There seemed to be a lot of synchronicity between what residents felt and what people working or living in Palo Alto felt as they rode their bikes to Redwood City.
How many of the 320 were residents?
We don't have an actual count. We didn't ask them to identify that. But I have some numbers coming up in a moment that I think will help you, give you some perspective.
Mr. Widmer?
Yeah, how many bikes did you count going up and down El Camino? when
I'll
you
get
were
that number for
counting
you.
36,000 vehicles.
I'll get that number in a sec here. It wasn't much. It's sort of what you think it would be. Most of us, we see people occasionally walking. We see some bicycles, but not a lot.
I don't know.
So over the spring and summer, we had not only the online survey, but we had 3 focused listening sessions. These are largely virtual, online, trying to pull in people at convenient hours. We had 3 pop-up events, including the Earth Day. I'll talk about it in a sec. We had a couple of meetings with community-based organizations, trying to especially find out what some of the disadvantaged communities, particularly in Menlo Park and North Fair Oaks, what their perspective was on improving access near Fifth Avenue and near Valparaiso.
Were
We've had
any
a tech-
of those community organizations Atherton organizations?
No, one was in North Fair Oaks, sort of in the county along Fifth Avenue, and the other was on the Menlo Park side. We had a technical working group of staff members from all the cities, Caltrans, sort of hashing through some of the technical details, and they're continuing to be part of the process. And then we had a virtual community meeting where we invited one and all to come out and let us know what they thought. So let's zoom a little bit on what we heard from Atherton. Well, let me just say, first of all, in terms of the online survey that we had up for several months, 320 320 responses. We believe most of them were Atherton, but no way of really counting that. By far, the most important concern was safety for pedestrians and bicyclists. It's not a surprise. We know that's a problem we're trying to solve, but you see relatively some of the other concerns in terms of scale, much lower. We're trying to nail all of these concerns in the study. Let's talk about Atherton and our residents on our next slide here. So you all remember Earth Day. We were all out there. We had 80 residents and some, I talked to a couple residents from Palo Alto that commute through the city, and we heard from them. That board there literally is towards the end of Earth Day, so you can start to get a feel. The dots are all huddled around safety, and that's why what we heard at Earth Day lines up with what we saw in our survey, which is safety, safety, safety. Now, safety, well, I'll get to that in a sec. We had a community meeting on June 13th. We had 12 residents. Some of them were Atherton residents. We had a focus group in late spring on June 27th, where we had some additional residents.
But wait, I don't understand. 12 residents, everybody's a resident somewhere. So I don't understand what that means.
Atherton residents.
No, he said some are Atherton
Yeah,
residents.
not all these were Atherton residents.
Oh.
At all 3 of these events, most were Atherton residents, but in total, we reached out in person with touch points touching 100 residents, most of them Atherton residents, all of them who took time out of their day because El Camino meant something to them. At Earth Day in particular, I talked to a number of Atherton residents. Their comments were safety. Now, safety means a lot of things. I heard from residents on East Selby Lane who were concerned about traffic and safety concerns related to the Selby restaurant. Okay, it's very specific, but I heard from three neighbors there. Technically not Atherton residents, but you heard that. Heard from a number of residents between on the east side of El Camino between Watkins, Fair Oaks and Encinal. So a lot of that's Atherton, some of that's Menlo Park. Concerns about crossing. And you know that some of the fatalities we've had have been in that stretch where El Camino cars go fast. So there have been requests to improve safety. I want to be able to walk from one side of El Camino after dinner and go on the other side of town. Heard a lot of that. So it was safety, not only for bicycles and pedestrians, but for residents who said, I don't feel safe in walking on El Camino.
But
But-
if we in the future, if we do more surveys, it would be good to have at the top of the survey, are you an Atherton resident or where? Because, you know, like at Earth Day, we had a lot of Menlo Park people came.
Yep.
Because the park borders right onto Menlo Park, okay? And they have gates to come into the area, so. And when you're talking to people, if you hold something up by Selby Lane, people from across the street, which is North Fair Oaks, come over because, you know, they're crossing that street to go to that, what's used to be called Selby Lane School. So they have a lot of input too. So it really would be good for us to understand what, you know, where they're from. Not that it would change things. We want to make things proper for everybody, but, you know, but we also could allocate the cost.
Right.
Well, and I think it's not just allocating costs. I think that's valid, but more it's informing people because I don't believe Atherton residents know anything about this. I mean, there may be a half a dozen that know
Yeah.
because they've spoken to you, but I don't think it's been publicized and having a space on the website. I mean, you
It's
get
hard to
very
get
few
to.
people
I'm
that take
gonna
advantage
interject a
of
little
that.
bit. We did
Yes.
have a variety of outreach efforts, as noted was the Athertonian.
Mhm.
I believe we mailed postcards to every Atherton resident, inviting them to participate.
With a QR code.
Yeah.
With details of the project and a QR code to the website and the date of the meeting.
Website
But as we
links to the
found out
survey.
with the
But
housing.
I think that's good, but do we know how many
Big
people
postcard.
responded
Yeah.
to that QR code?
I think we can, I don't know if they tracked it that.
They don't track. The QR code sent them to the Complete Streets website, which asked for solicited their opinion, much like on a chart like you see there. But I don't think it asked for their address. So there's no way to.
But,
I think that in our future efforts, we can try and get some more information as to
Yeah.
where they're from.
I mean, this is not an isolated problem. We always have this issue. And we've seen it especially with traffic related stuff.
right.
But I think what Robert's articulating is, I don't think it's an issue of town's outreach. I think it's an issue of finding the touch points for our residents that they respond to.
Right.
And we send postcards, we do the Athertonian, we do the newsletter, we do Instagram, we do all of that stuff.
Right.
Not everybody responds to those things.
Yeah, we found that out during the
Okay.
housing, right?
I know, but I just want to say, regardless if they respond or not, we all know that there's dangerous situations out there that need to be
Yeah,
remedied
Agreed.
without having everybody say, you know, oh my gosh, this is so dangerous, it's dangerous. But you just know that it is, that our the sides of the road are overgrown. There's not enough width for a bicycle or a pedestrian to walk safely. The crossing, even though you've got your hawk beacons, the hawk beacons are problematic. I mean, as you know, getting out of Alejandra onto El Camino turning left is so hard to do sometimes that people get out of their car and go bang on it and then try to get back in the car. And then people are, I mean.
That's not a
Not a-
pedestrian safety issue. That's frustration that it's hard to cross El Camino in an automobile. That's why they get out of the car
Solution
and
there
push
is
the
to
That's
put a
true.
roundabouts on the
That's true.
Camino.
That's true.
That's the
It
perfect place
becomes
we
a
should be doing
pedestrian
that.
issue when
But
the
I think
person
Elizabeth's
outside the
point
car,
is
yeah.
real, that we all know El Camino is a problem. I live close to El Camino. I ran for office as let's fix El Camino. It was my main issue and I won my election. Every email I sent out when I was running for office about fixing El Camino, that was the one I got the most responses to. So
Me too.
this is absolutely a major issue in the town. It is an issue for people who send their kids to schools that are on the other side of El Camino, then they have to drive their kids to school.
Yeah.
Because they cannot get to school without their car, because they don't feel safe walking or on their bikes. And that affects people who are on this side of El Camino going to Sacred Heart. It affects people on my side of El Camino or going to Encinal. So it's affecting a huge swath of Atherton. It's also affecting our neighbors. And so I think this survey, knowing how other people get through the town of Atherton, is useful information. And I think it's not telling us anything that we don't already know from being residents ourselves. Like, this is a problem that needs fixing.
One other sort of data point for you guys. When Robert and I and George have been out to Selby Lane to talk to our residents about, bike lanes on Selby Lane, I've talked to residents who are all aware of the work we're doing on El Camino. In fact, they have said, as many of you know, why don't you get El Camino fixed with this bike study before we talk about bike lanes on other streets? So there is more awareness out there. Now, what I've told them is, that's great, get involved in this process. So
Yeah.
the word is out there. Now, one thing we've also heard is, when you look at how to fix El Camino with bike and pedestrian, with sidewalks, especially with bike lanes, don't just put a can of paint, don't just put a stripe on El Camino and expect my kids to get on El Camino. They want safety built into whatever we do there. I think it's common sense, but they've said, do this right, don't bother. We also heard comments from residents down towards, beyond, south of south of Menlo College, who said, right now, there's a fair amount of cut-through traffic, people ducking out at Alejandra to go to Sacred Heart or some of the schools back there. We know what happens. They're saying, number one, can you help fix that and reduce the cut-through traffic? And two, whatever you do at the intersection of Valparaiso, don't push more cars and bicycles out into our neighborhood. So we're well aware that Valparaiso. I'm sorry?
Into the Valparaiso neighborhood.
I'll hit that. So basically, the concern is, as you approach Valparaiso, we're dropping to 2 through lanes and a right turn lane. So we're going from 3 through lanes to 2 through and a right.
That's true. That's right.
One of the concerns raised is, don't get rid of that right turn lane, because if you do, that may cause folks to turn off of El Camino on Alejandra to loop around as opposed to going straight
That
through
makes
to
sense.
Valparaiso
That makes sense.
to make the right. And so we have to be cognizant of that type of impact. There really aren't many other areas where cut through is really going to be an issue. If you're going south, if you're going either southbound or northbound, because there's not really too many parallel streets.
Right.
Well, if you're going southbound, there's concern about cut through based on what we do on El Camino with Almondral, Stockbridge, and Tuscaloosa, those
Watkins.
streets, because that was one reason we didn't put in the light at Selby Lane, which I'm not saying was the right decision, but there was concern about, if you put in a light at Selby Lane, you're going to increase the number of people
Yeah, so like I say,
cutting up on
these are
those
the
streets.
concerns that were raised. We're hearing them, we're relaying them.
Mhm, mhm.
And so it's just, as we look at this, we need to be cognizant of what some potential impacts might be.
So that's our long way of setting the table. Let's shift to Andrew Lee, who will start to lay out some of the possible solutions for our community.
So let me just say one thing before we go there, which is, my concern is that we make sure that Atherton residents get aware of it. And I know it's a problem. I'm not criticizing anybody. I'm just saying it might be easier to contact North Fair Oaks residents than it is to contact Atherton residents and really get connection to them. So I think that's been aired. The other issue that I think is a really important issue is, and this underscores that. The comment that over 50% of vehicles are less than 5 miles, I absolutely believe that. That results in a potential shift to bicycles for safer infrastructure. That's ridiculous.
Right.
It's ridiculous because people in Atherton have to drive somewhere to go to any kind of store. They don't exist here. So everybody drives, and 5 miles is about right. You're either driving to Redwood City or Menlo Park. But to think that people are not going to do that and they're going to ride bicycles is absurd. That's never going to happen.
I ride my bike to go grocery shopping all the time.
Okay, but,
It's not
but you're unusual.
I'm just saying, like,
Let's
we
face
don't-
it.
Young.
I am young. There are a lot of young people in Atherton. Let's not forget, but the point is like, people might, and that would have an impact on traffic. And if you provide opportunities for people to explore multimodal transportation in a safe way, then they're probably more likely to do it. And I think I know of a lot of people who would like to ride their bikes more than they do right now. Because right now, for me to get to the grocery store, because I avoid El Camino, I have to do this wild zigzag through the town of Atherton. And then when I get to Menlo Park, there are bike lanes and I feel safe about it. Versus when
On
I'm
El
in
Camino?
No, no.
No, not on El Camino. I do this wild zigzag through.
Valparaiso.
But if there was a bike lane
Bike
on El
lanes.
Camino that was sufficiently safe, then I probably would take El Camino because it would be way faster than this like zigzag
It's a
requiring me to
straight
take all
shot.
these lefts over through traffic. Like I've stopped Atherton Avenue traffic because I had to turn and so turn left and there's too much traffic. Like, like we should be providing opportunities for people to get places on bikes. There are e-bikes, there's a lot of technology that people are looking forward to using. And so assuming that nobody will go to Trader Joe's in Menlo Park on their bike is wrong.
But I agree with Rick. There won't be a
agree
lot.
with that.
Okay? And it depends on how you set it up, whether or not people will do it. So if some of these alternatives, I mean, I wouldn't get on El Camino with them anyway.
I wouldn't either.
People drive fast on that road. You can't see in some cases. And
Well, with
I
the
just think,
protected
yes,
bike
I agree
that
with
we're talking
you
about.
that some people will take their bikes if there's that infrastructure. But
Which is
I
the perfect-
disagree that it's going to be a significant number.
Let's let them finish their presentation.
And that's a perfect segue to the discussion about solutions, because a lot of this is an exercise about what would it take to
Mhm.
get your kid
Mhm.
or you on a bike.
Okay, thank you. So we're alternatives being considered. Thank you.
All right, great. Thank you, Doug. Andrew Lee, Senior Traffic Engineer with Parametrics. I'm on the technical team and we walked through a bunch of different alternatives. In total, in the packet, there's 7 different alternatives that cover a variety of modes. We're only going to talk about 3 in this presentation. And to start, we came up with an evaluation matrix to see out of all of the different priorities that were established in the project initiation for the various goals that we're trying to accomplish, along with the public outreach and the priorities that our neighbors are identifying as needs, we came up with these 4 large categories for evaluation. They cover quality of life, which reflect how the existing nature of El Camino Real is designed and what kind of access is allowed. Safety for not only people walking and bicycling, but also people who take transit and driving as well. So the alternatives also have some impacts, benefits in some cases for people who also drive. Multimodal options, equity, and access. That's getting to the point of right now, El Camino Real is designed as a singular mode facility. There are no alternatives. And it's one of the baseline principles that we're trying to accomplish, that if we want to see people have different choices, we need to have facilities that can accommodate that as a safe and comfortable choice. So that is where we're going with that. And then lastly, construction, because this type of improvement is costly, not only for money, but in terms of time, in terms of construction intensity, the degree of inconvenience that may be felt by the neighborhood. And so the scoring system here runs from a low, medium, and high, but I'll highlight that for construction, a high impact for construction is actually a bad thing rather than a good thing. So it's an inverted scale for that very last metric there. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to talk through the cross sections. So in engineering, traffic engineering parlance, it's when we take a slice of the road and just look at it at that one singular slice. And this is an interesting exercise because once we have the parameters of what that slice looks like, then we try to apply it for the rest of the corridor. And so I want to try to mitigate or moderate some of your expectations, which is we are looking at the slice applied to the corridor. So it is for the mid-block locations. We are not going to be covering some of the spot locations. Spot locations for traffic engineering is intersections, for driveways, for crosswalks, curb ramps. Not going to be covering that at this level. That's for the next phase of the project. However, once we figure out what the cross-section looks like, then we can work out some of those details. And in fact, my team's working on that right now. This current cross-section is the current condition, the no-build scenario. So we're looking at 3 lanes in each direction. There's a center median of varying width. Sometimes there's a left turn pocket or 2. And then largely it's unpaved on the side. So it's a paved shoulder and an unpaved area. There's trees, there's utility poles, and it gets muddy sometimes. Next slide, please.
So are you assuming in the no-build scenario that there are curbs around there? Because there aren't.
No, I'm not assuming that.
Well, because you have the planting strip higher up than the street.
Yeah, it's a limitation of the software that we're using. The planting strip is intended to show that it is a vegetated area, but not a walking
All right,
surface.
okay, no problem, thanks.
Okay, so for alternative 2, this is the alternative where if we were to maintain 3 travel lanes in each direction and try to construct something in the remaining space, what could we land with? What it looks like is that we could pave a sidewalk in the unpaved area right now, but it would be narrow and it would conflict with some of the existing features out there, like the utility poles, like some large trees. It would not be very wide. And in
Wouldn't
some
be
cases,
Very
would not,
wide.
it would not be very wide.
Yeah.
In some cases,
So
it
would it be
wouldn't,
6 feet wide?
in some locations, but if there are conflicting utilities or trees, it could be quite a bit narrower.
So is it possible, when I looked at this with George, we talked about different ones and he wanted to make sure that we were also considering green infrastructure. So if we were repaving the street, but keeping 3, because this is the only alternative with the 6 lanes. And if that was important to the community, could we pave it so that the water off the street runs towards the center and then we have green infrastructure in the middle?
Oh, that would entail regrading the entire street.
Oh, you're gonna have to do something when you're resurfacing it, right? You're gonna have to do that.
That
Just
would
like they're
be-
doing down on El Camino down in Palo Alto, they're resurfacing the whole thing. They graded a lot of it up and then they're putting it back in. You could have put a little bit of a grade moving down as opposed to having one that's going off to cause flooding. Just it's an idea,
Yeah.
maybe just for you to think about, but that keeps 6 lanes, which may be important to the community. I'm not saying that would be my, necessarily my choice, but the 6 lanes, we've heard from people, don't reduce it. In fact, we got a letter today.
I had a question and I warned George that I'd be asking this, so hopefully you guys are prepared. But Redwood City is about a year ahead of us in this process. Do we know if they're planning on having 2 or 3 lanes for their part of ECR?
I'll answer that.
Okay.
So they have a shop project with Caltrans that's currently under design. They are in some areas removing travel lanes and to put in protected bike lanes. And so their intent is what they call the Class 4. And so approaching Selby, they have it dropped down to 2 lanes. So right now it's 2 lanes through downtown Redwood City up until you pass through Woodside Road, pass across Woodside Road. And if you're coming, I guess, going southbound, the right turn from Woodside onto El Camino adds the lane.
Yeah. Adds it.
The concept drawing that we saw is dated all the way back to 2022. We have not seen anything since then, but in that drawing, it shows 2 lanes in the southbound direction, pretty much up until Renato, where to match up with the 3 lanes in Atherton, they're going from 2 lanes to 3 lanes. We have expressed a little bit of concern about how that is shown. But we have not been, there really hasn't been much in terms of interaction since late 22 on that project. So I believe that their schedule, I think it should, George, is it 2028 construction is what they're targeting 2028 for construction. So
You raise a really good point, Stacy, and we've talked, I mean, at one time, we had a group meeting with Redwood City and Menlo Park because we're kind of in the middle of them both, and they were going to be doing work and Menlo Park was going to be doing work. And so that, you know, can't we just kind of blend in a little bit more with what, and work together so that it's more seamless? And if they're going to do a protected bike lane, how are they doing it in their area, and can we do it also? And a protected bike lane is really the only way that you're going to feel safe in biking on El Camino.
yeah, so I'm going to just highlight, I think one of the reasons why this exhibit is shown is portions of the right of way are really tight. And it is potentially doable to provide facilities without taking out a lane, but it doesn't provide you with the ideal type of facilities. And so you have narrow sidewalks, you have unbuffered, unprotected bike lanes. It provides connectivity, but not in an ideal manner. And so a variety of, you have, you know, several different things that were attached to the staff report. Andrew here is just going to highlight kind of the ones that we'd like to take to that next step where we kind of lay out longitudinally along the corridor what these different scenarios would look like. And what we're trying to do tonight is get your blessing on those 3 or 4 alternatives that we take to that next level. And so Andrew, why don't you continue? Anthony, if you can move to the next slide.
I don't have an alternative 3 in my packet. Is there not? an
So
alternative
attached,
No.
so attached to the agenda, you have all 7 sections. In this slide deck, we're just highlighting those alternatives that we think should
Oh, 3 was the
move
bus.
forward. And we're happy to talk about those, but we kind of want to get through these. And if there's one of the other ones that is of particular interest, like for example, I'll give you the example. Alternative 1 is just putting in sidewalks. Wider sidewalks than alternative 2, but it doesn't accommodate bike facilities. And so that's one of the reasons that was dropped out. And so there's an alternative 3, which I think had bus lanes in it.
Yeah, with nobody riding the buses.
So again, it's something that was looked at. It's not recommended to move forward at this point. And so now we have alternative 4.
Good remove.
Okay.
Okay.
On alternative 4, you're planning on putting those stanchions up there that nobody likes.
It's an option. So the first part is
These
having,
little
Oh, the
buffers.
buffer.
probably take it over and forward.
Cylinders.
Okay,
ballers.
Well,
so-
the question is, can you do something besides this? Because those, if you have two bikers, okay, passing each other or something like that, you catch your handlebars on those, you fall over and you fall into the street where the cars are. And where Menlo Park put them up on Oak Grove, it only took a month before they took them down. So I just don't see having a separate space like they're doing on Valparaiso, great.
Mhm.
But I can't
So-
see putting those things up
Menlo
there.
Park has
Okay.
also done. a
So
whole
what
lot of-
we indicated on here is separated / buffered. So The idea first is to provide the space between the cyclist and the car, approximately 4 feet of space.
Yeah.
Within that space, we have the option of putting in a physical barrier separation if we want to do so. And that could either be bollards, could be planters, it could be something else.
Like planters or not.
There are issues with all options. I mean, there's an ideal for the cyclist to have some sort of physical separation or a more visible separation than just striping on the ground. On the other hand, from a maintenance perspective, the street sweeper can't get to the curb if those things are in the way, or as council member said, that if people are trying to pass each other and don't communicate, it doesn't work very well. But on the longitudinal layout, as we lay it out, it doesn't really matter on that layout whether or not there's that physical item
Right.
there. It helps us figure out how we place the facilities.
Yeah, 5 is good though. Got the
Um,
flowers there and everything. It's good.
So this one here again provides wider
I
sidewalks.
did my prep for the meeting.
But, you know,
Um,
going through it.
So this alternative provides a little more space for pedestrians, provides some space for things like trees, green infrastructure, et cetera, along curb line, and some separation for that cyclist. Next slide, Anthony. So slight variation is potentially to take that bikeway and lift it up from the pavement to give again a more physical separation between the vehicles and the cyclist. And that 2-foot kind of green is more illustrative of separation. We're not going to be able, realistically, we're not going to be able to maintain a 2-foot strip of vegetation.
Beautiful. Beautiful vegetation.
And so,
Does the green area, the flowers, is that?
the flower side could be planted, it could be a parkway, it could be green infrastructure.
Does it have to be
um,
4 feet?
But again, it again provides that physical separation from the vehicles to the cyclist. To do both alternatives 4 and 5, it requires the loss of a through lane.
So
Yes.
why did you make one of the lanes 12 feet wide and one 11 feet wide
So
on alternative 5?
So the recommendation in certain cases is if you're going to have cars driving adjacent to the curb, to have the lanes a little wider, because you'll have the gutter next to the curb. And so if you accommodate for that, there's about 11 feet of paving. And technically, in some cases, we might be able to get some approval from the state to go a little narrower on the lanes. But illustratively, what we're showing is to accommodate that gutter, we probably want a little more space in that lane.
But you just said the 2-foot thing with the grass growing up is probably unfeasible, so you take those feet out. You could shrink the 4-foot down to 3 feet. You make everything 12 feet, which, I've gotten some comments back from people going up and down Valparaiso
gonna say
now,
that-
and they don't like the 11-foot because they feel it's too constricting.
Okay.
And especially when trucks are coming
Yeah.
at them.
Drive slower.
Yeah, that's
It
the
makes you
point.
drive slower, which I think is a good thing.
Okay, well, I understand that and understand
Well-
when we had that conversation.
It's
However,
a good
big
thing.
construction trucks, if
Uh-huh.
they're 11 feet, they're exactly 11 feet. And so they're all the way out
They're,
to the end.
they're
Okay.
also mostly going in the right-hand lane, as are buses.
Yeah.
So if you're gonna have a difference
Yeah.
between lanes, it makes sense for the right-hand lane to be the 12-foot lane.
Going from El Camino up to.
In any
Alameda.
direction, in
Yeah.
any direction.
Yeah.
As designed.
Oh,
So-
yeah, well, that's what they've done. here.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I think the 2 feet But
But it's- I
it
think that-
really just widens the sidewalk.
I think it widens, in my opinion, the wider the sidewalk, the more comfortable people will be. You've seen just on regular narrow sidewalks, if there's a stroller going one way and somebody trying to go the other, it gets tight.
Along
Um,
Watkins, how about that?
So
Yeah,
adding
yeah,
the
yeah.
space to the
Put a fence there,
sidewalk
too.
is important. I'm going to say that the other thing that we are aware of, but it's not part of this cross-section stuff, is that we know that it's flat out there.
Mm,
And there are potential impacts of putting in sidewalks at an elevated grade versus the properties behind.
mm,
Those are things that there's a whole bunch of things that get worked out as we move through design,
mhm.
as opposed to this conceptual, what do we want El Camino to look like? And that's what we're trying to do, is envision what El Camino looks like. And so we're running through some recommendations in terms of things that we will further in the analysis to help give you enough information to pick a preferred alternative at the end.
Okay.
And so the next slide. And then, so this is a novel concept that came up during the conversations. And that is, should we consider an asymmetric road? Meaning not take out a lane in both directions, but maybe take out a lane in one direction, provide sidewalks on both sides and a cycle track of some sort on one side of the street. There are some jurisdictions that have done that, where they do a two-way bike lane, two-way bikeway on one side of the street. It works great for straight north-south traffic. It gets a little complicated when you're trying to make turns or go off onto the side streets. But again, this is just something that we are recommending that we look at as well.
Interesting. I didn't think about that.
I'm not in favor of that.
And then, so next slide, Anthony.
I've got a bicyclist here. We're going to ask you for your opinion, All right.
Okay, and so this is a matrix kind of showing how these different alternatives rank. Generally speaking, because of the narrowness of the bike lane and the sidewalk, alternative 2 is not the ideal, but it is an alternative that addresses what can we do if we keep all the lanes there. And so in the interest of time, I think what we'll do now is just transition over to you and or the public to make comment, for you to ask us questions. And if there's a different alternative that's in your package that you think we should consider instead of any of these, that's what we want to hear from you.
Thank you, Robert. Thank you so much. I'd like to ask members of the public for their comments before we bring it back to council to discuss a little bit more, if that's okay.
Yeah, I just have one question.
Okay,
About
sure.
alternative 7 with the two-way.
Yeah.
None of the other, like Redwood City's not considering this. They're looking at something like alternative 5, right? The only reason that would make sense is if our neighbors are doing it, is from my perspective. So I'm just curious if.
I'm going to say that we have a long enough stretch. If we were to do that, what you do is you transition at the ends to bring people in. I'm going to say in Burlingame on California, they did something similar.
Hmm.
I'm going to say it's not elevated with the sidewalk, but they have a two-way cycle track. And it's basically the cycle track and then parking and then the lanes. Okay, and so I'm going to, it's an idea. If you'd rather us look at something else, we're happy to look at something else. One of the things was mentioned is that this is just, what you're looking at is a slice. There are complexities in a whole bunch of different areas, and that includes the commercial uses in North Fair Oaks and the on-street parking, or those areas in Menlo Park. And I think there's some diagonal parking in Menlo Park as well.
Not on
Yeah.
El Camino.
Not on El
Okay.
Camino,
I
no.
think, I'm trying to remember, I thought that there was one commercial building there.
Let's hear from
so-
our members of the public.
By the way, the
Why not?
two-way
Yes,
on
yeah.
one side, number 7, that would be great for Marsh Road,
Yeah, I'm with you.
right? Because
Let's
there's
do
no
it.
room.
We got to cover the
cover that channel.
We've got to cover the
Yeah, you
channel.
can
We've
start
been
Not at a
talking
million.
about-
We had a chance to do that.
We didn't have
Excuse
the
me,
money.
this is not on the agenda.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Eric.
Jerome Lugers.
Hi.
I think alternative 7 just isn't gonna work. If you're coming from Redwood City on a bicycle, I'm certainly not gonna change to the other side of the road to ride to Atherton and then change back when I get to Menlo Park. It's too much trouble. I'm gonna have to stop at a red light,
Yeah.
cross the street,
Yeah.
go across. And the other problem is for cars that are pulling out of side streets, they have to look both ways. If you're making a right turn, you got to look left and you have to look right because bikes could be coming from either direction.
Good.
And we have that problem on Ringwood, although there are bike lanes on each side and that's going to be redesigned, but it's so wide on the northern side that you get people riding bikes in both directions.
Mm.
I personally I think you're going to I like alternative 5. You're going to have some kind of physical barrier to get people to do it.
Mhm. Okay.
Can I
Thank you so
s-
much.
And
Anything
Jerry
else?
gets his groceries on his bicycle,
Yep.
I know.
Hello,
Record.
how are you? Nice to
I'm
see
good, thank you. I'm Gary Bloom, live over on Isabella. So I just have a couple of comments just listening to the conversation. I'm also on the fire district board, so applaud the idea of improving safety along the corridor. As a resident, as a fire district board member, it's a concern. It's definitely dangerous. I think some of the apathy or apathetic response you're getting from the community is I've been living there for 20 years. It's just a belief of it's never going to change. So the way we look at El Camino Real, it might as well be a brick wall going all the way across. And the only reason you cross it is because you need to turn onto it or turn off of it, or you need to cut over to get to Watkins so you can get to Marsh Road, so you can get to 101 or Atherton Avenue, either direction. So I think that's where a lot of the apathy is coming from, is it's just been this way for so long. I would only ask the council to really consider, before you conclude going from 3 lanes to 2 lanes, that you really take into account the traffic engineer's point of view on that. Only because if that street gridlocks, my personal belief is that the ability to make the turns onto that street, if it's all gridlocked with traffic because it's 2 lanes, will just make it worse. It's already extremely difficult to get across. We don't have a protected left turn or a protected right turn at the end of Isabella going onto it. And then we have that oddity of the cars trying to make the left turn from Marsh Road. And we do get the school traffic as well, the cut through traffic that picks up for about 40 minutes in the morning, 40 minutes in the afternoon. But I would really encourage you to make sure that we're not going to so horribly impact the flow that the residents of Atherton cannot get onto that road. Because what I see when I'm driving down the road is residents get very impatient trying to make the turn, and eventually they gun it and they go for it at the most inopportune time. And that's when we end up with the accidents as well, is, people are trying to squeeze in rather than just wait it out. But if it's always gridlocked, which is kind of the case when you get up to Middlefield at Watkins, it's always gridlocked. At some point, you've got to just start putting your nose out there and go. You could sit there for 15 minutes if you don't take advantage of a small gap. But I would recommend you really seriously consider creating a similar problem down on El Camino. And then as far as the residents in our neighborhood, I think most of them, because I'm an avid dog walker, I'm not an avid bicyclist. The group of people that walk dogs regularly, they all walk down, they dead end at any one of the streets on El Camino, and they turn around and go back the other direction. So you're basically not looping around. So even a minimal pedestrian pathway that has some protection will increase the ability for residents to actually transition onto it, to walk down a couple blocks to make to cross over at the protected intersections. So I think you have a lot of options, but I would, I would really encourage you to make sure the traffic doesn't become so bad that it just kills the benefit of everything you're trying to do.
So I have a question for you, Gary.
Sure.
At Isabella, there is a hawk beacon. Is that right?
Yes.
Do you ever use that to go across to get to the park?
Almost never. And the reason being is once you going across, there's nowhere to walk once you get to the east side of El Camino.
Yeah.
There's nowhere to walk at that point. You're
Right.
walking in the dirt and
Yeah.
squeezed
So I
in
always
between the cars.
Put a hawk beacon at Isabella, because it goes to nowhere and,
I think it gets used by the people that are going to and from the bus stops on the
I
two
see.
sides of the road. So
It gets
generally, when you
used by
see somebody
people
using it,
By going to the park.
Accident where the guy got killed.
well, that's what he's saying. It doesn't go anywhere.
It
once you
doesn't
get
go
up.
anywhere.
Right.
It's
So you
true.
just have to.
the people that are using the buses going north,
The bus
going
that
either
he's in.
direction on El Camino.
Look, there's people that end up walking on Watkins. And
Yeah.
Right.
it's not safe, but they are. There are people walking on Watkins.
Well, that's a separate issue. Once you cross El Camino, there's nowhere to walk on El Camino,
Yeah, but
even though you have the protected crossing. And then I agree, if you want to get to the park,
You
then
have
you're
to go to-
walking on the road down Watkins to get
There's
to
no
the
place
park
to walk
anyhow.
in Watkins.
You-
I did that the other day. It was-
Yeah, and I do it on occasion, but it's not my preferable place to walk is amongst big cars and
Everything was
trucks.
never designed for sidewalks.
Right.
No,
Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Ken, how are you?
I'm doing well. Hi, guys. Ken Frederick Lindenwood. Boy, amazingly how everything is so complicated, right? The devil is in detail. This is really, when you look at those dimensions, trying to get everything in those area, you have my sympathy. It's a difficult question.
Yeah.
Two questions. One, I would ask us though to think about the idea, what happens if in 5 years we decide we have to put in multifamily housing on El Camino? If HCD requires that, we happen to roll over whatever happens, whatever we do to El Camino should factor in to having multifamily housing on it. What's the right lane situation to do that? I don't know that answer, but I'd ask you to think about it. Lastly, do we have the data per kind of by the hour, by the direction of how many cars, how many walkers, how many bicyclists there are on El Camino and the other roads? Do we know that? Or is it just, we know it happens, but we measure it?
Oh, he mentioned that he had some
6,000
data
6,000 cars.
at the beginning of the meeting before you got here.
But how about the bikes and the walkers?
On the bicyclists, he said there was few
Wait,
and
let's-
walkers.
All right, no, okay, you can't answer, sorry, but that's the
We've already
question.
done it.
Thanks.
You're welcome. Thank you. Anyone else? Anyone online? Okay, let's bring it back for our final discussion.
I have a question.
Yes.
So in alternative 2, you show the sidewalks as elevated. And in alternative 5, you show from the planter, the bike lane and the sidewalks is all elevated. So would you create some separation between the cars and the cyclist if in fact in alternative 2, the bike lanes were elevated as in addition to the sidewalk?
Let me try to restate your question because I didn't get it exactly. You're asking about elevating the 5-foot wide bike lane to the height of the 6-foot high sidewalk? And would there be a separation between like a curb or something from the street, from the cars driving to that, on that bike lane? Some kind of a separation, not like a bollard, but I mean, are you thinking like a curb?
So let me see if you switch to alternative 1 in your package, not in the slide deck, in your agenda package, it's basically a wider sidewalk version of alternative two.
No bike lane.
And what I'm hearing is put the cyclists on the sidewalk with the pedestrian. Is that what,
Essentially, you
It-
could,
and so
right now, you've got the cyclist in the street with the cars.
that's correct.
And if you changed it and put the cyclist on an elevated platform, and you would obviously separate somehow the pedestrian and the cyclist.
So the concern, I can say, the concern is whether or not we want cyclists riding right on the sidewalk in essentially a 10 or 11-foot width. That's pretty tight to accommodate both the cyclist and the.
What's the average depth, what's the required depth of a multi-use path?
Width or depth?
Width,
Width.
sorry.
Width.
Multi-use paths at minimum 8 with 2-foot shoulders on either side and a 5-foot lateral separation from the edge of that shoulder to the edge of the vehicle travel way.
Right, so,
That's bigger.
So
That's a
it's a
lot
lot
bigger.
wider.
Space.
right.
Yeah, people,
So, Mr.
where you
Whitmer?
where you have bicyclists and pedestrians,
Yeah.
the bicycle handlebars are at your kidney level. And if they run into you, you're dead. Okay? You will not get fixed anytime soon. Okay? Not enough time to get you to the hospital and they've had this problem in the Riverwalk or I guess it's the Riverwalk down in Austin.
Seattle?
They
Oh.
in Austin, Texas, where people walk around and the bicycles come by and somebody's not paying attention, right in the kidney, the guy dies. Okay, so having multi-use is not good, and that's why Palo Alto says you can't ride your bike on the sidewalks.
Yeah.
Okay, because it's dangerous. So I don't agree with
Good
that.
point. What do you think? Does that kind of
I mean,
put the fear of God in you a little bit? No.
That's a good question.
But it's a good question.
it's
So the other-
it's
the
not a
other-
reason not to look at raising it.
The other question I had was,
Especially if there's a
if we have
separation.
everything raised, then how are we going to be implementing green infrastructure here?
Some green infrastructure there.
You have a curb here, so you're just moving the flooding further out into the road.
No, so green infrastructure usually incorporated within streetscapes. You have the curbs and you have openings in the curbs to bring that water in. And one example is what we just did on Fair Oaks.
Fair Oaks and Lloyden.
Fair Oaks and Lloyden, we have openings to bring the water, in that case, like under the sidewalk or through the curb, into the biotreatment area. I think that they built a bunch on Middlefield in North Fair Oaks. They have basically they're curbed bulb outs,
Mhm.
and they have the planter areas in
I'll go
there.
up and look at them.
These are just kind of schematics,
Okay.
rough ideas. It's not a fully fledged
It's
plan.
just like, it was just a question.
It's a good
And it
question.
would be a
though.
requirement. It's a good question, but it would be a requirement,
Yeah.
whatever we're doing. You've got to put in yes. Mr.
One of the other things to think about on this particular project, you remember, I keep bringing his name up every time we talk about traffic. Jeffrey Tumlin,
Tumlin.
who spoke about, the platooning of vehicles and the way traffic flows and signalization and signal synchronization
Mhm.
all up and down this corridor. So
Mhm.
even if you reduce the lanes of travel to 2 lanes in each direction, if the signal's properly
Right.
synchronized, you're not going to get the gridlock.
Right, right.
I
I
still
mean,
think
I
we
think
should-
we've got gridlock now at Valparaiso and El Camino.
It's because
that
you're
backs-
going into two
And that
lanes.
backs up
Right.
Yep.
to Alejandra
Exactly.
and you can't get through. And I have experience in that. And so, yeah, and if you're going into 2 lanes, it's probably better. And if we can synchronize the signal, honestly,
I think
they
we
do
just
that
do
on Van
roundabouts.
Ness Avenue. I've been going up to Van Ness Avenue a lot.
Mhm.
And I can go through 7 or 8
Yep.
green stoplights with 2 lanes, and they've synchronized them all.
Mhm.
That's a lot. That's pretty cool.
But El Camino was the right type of street to put a roundabout on, or several roundabouts. because those are the type of streets you put them on.
Well,
Higher traffic rates.
We have only two stoplights. Well, we have Atherton Avenue and Encinal, right? Those are only
No.
two stoplights?
No,
Selby Lane.
Valparaiso
Oh,
was not.
no.
No,
Yeah.
no, there's no stoplight at Selby Lane.
So there's that Fifth. So the stoplights along this stretch.
That's Redwood
But
City.
it's
No.
between Selby Lane and.
So within the project stretch.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so we're starting north of Selby,
Yeah. okay.
right at our town limits.
Mhm,
And so you have Fifth Avenue,
mhm,
you have Atherton,
Mhm.
Fair Oaks,
mhm.
Encinal,
Encinal.
and then
Mhm,
Valparaiso.
Valparaiso.
And that's not to say that in the future, there may not be more.
Maybe more.
And the other things that we will be cognizant of as we lay these things out are, there were the concerns about left turns, there's concerns about right turns. And we need to accommodate U-turn traffic on El Camino. And so one of the things that may be discussed at some point in the future, are which side streets on El Camino are right turn only during certain hours, to kind of take care of some of those safety concerns about trying to make the left across.
Okay.
Um,
You know, we're getting short
getting
on
short on
time,
time.
and we've had a lot of good discussion. We're supposed to provide feedback on the assessment of the various cross sections and proposed alternatives.
You can go first.
Go ahead.
I like alternative 5. I think having a buffer between the bike lane and El Camino makes a lot of sense. And I think having a full sidewalk
Okay.
makes a lot of sense.
Councilmember Whitmer?
If we're agreeing to reduce a lane on each side, then I would go with 5 as well.
And Mr. DeGolia?
I agree with that, but I think that if you want to reduce El Camino to 4 lanes, you better let the residents know, because you're going to have a shitstorm.
So let me just
That would be
clarify.
the
We are actually planning to take 3 or 4 alternatives and draw out the entire stretch.
Okay.
So we're not asking you to pick one.
Good.
We're asking you to confirm the ones that we are going to draw out for further evaluation. And so we're not saying pick your favorite now. We're asking you to confirm that we are picking the right ones to carry forward to that next step.
Well, and you do 5 and 2.
So I think 5 should definitely be one of those. I also think that you should redo, I think the only asymmetrical was 7, right?
There's 2.
No,
Number
I
2.
don't want
And-
symmetric.
Well, hold on.
Oh.
I think you should redo alternative 7 to have the bike lanes on both sides. I don't agree
Can
with
you
that.
click?
Three
Two-
lanes on one
I don't agree
and
with
2 on
that
the
at
other.
all. Yeah. I think you should present one alternative that shows 3 lanes on one side and 2 on the other, but I think putting the bike lanes on only one side makes no sense. I think what Jerry said is right about that. Right. Or you could go with,
So
I would-
that's close to alternative 5, isn't it?
Well,
How about just staying with alternative, redrawing
it's-
alternative?
Yeah, it's
2,
close
right?
to alternative 5, but it's,
I'm trying to understand what the cycle,
3 lanes on one side.
how you would, where we would put,
I don't know.
if
that's
you're
not
putting
my
the bike
problem.
lane on both sides, there's not enough
Can
room
we
to keep
add
a,
more,
Well,
Saying
you,
no
if you
sidewalk?
look at the one where you've got,
if you don't want a sidewalk on that side, you can probably do it, but it's,
So if you're okay with a 5-foot bike lane and narrowing the sidewalks to 7, you could move one of those bike lanes to the other side.
Yeah.
But you got a 7-foot sidewalk on one side, an 8-foot on the other side.
no.
That makes it like
no,
5.
Not on the,
Yeah.
not on the,
On the asymmetrical one, the 8-foot sidewalk on one side, a 7-foot sidewalk
Oh,
on the other.
They're
I-
6 feet on both sides.
I think
Sidewalk?
you can figure it
On
out.
mine,
if we're gonna present these to
Yeah, on 7,
residents,
there's 8
and
on
we
one
want
side
to
and
ferret
7.
out what their concerns are, then I think you need to draw out 2, which has 6 lanes, and 5, which then goes down to 4 and has protection in it.
That's different than what's in
And
the
I think
book.
that those, you'll then get the input of, we don't want to lose that lane.
Here you go.
That's all.
It's the same. It's just mirror image. It's 3.
Okay, so I'm gonna
Flips.
say that what we did was for the presentation, we flipped where the 3 lanes are versus the
Ah.
handout that you
So
had.
you modified the one.
We
from
we
staff.
indicated
Most high
modified.
is alternative 5.
So we should go off of
In this
the,
sheet.
The one that was
The-
in the
the-
book,
the one that
not
was
the
hand-
handout.
no, I think the handout is what he said.
The slide deck was kind of
More
a
basic.
reverse of the one that was in there. The concern was if you have 3 lanes on the same side that you have the 2-way bike lane,
Oh,
Yeah.
I see.
the median is shifted over a little too much.
Jeez.
Ah,
Oh.
And so that's why we revised, that's why when we described it, I wrote modified in the staff report, and we kind of,
Green has to stay in the middle.
Oh, I
Um,
got
It's
it.
got to be this one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yours doesn't work because they'd have to move
It's not
it.
mine.
it's mine.
Look,
It's all mine.
It's all
Um,
yours.
Yeah,
So.
Rick redid them all.
I think you get the idea. Is that
Okay.
enough?
So number
So-
5, number 7.
Okay, so like I said, the ones that we had listed to carry forward are number 2,
Number 2.
which
I
I,
just don't think anyone's gonna want to. I
they,
mean,
they
a
may not want it, but we have to say
There's
that we
people
look,
that are
I'm
gonna
gonna say,
want to.
we're doing this to say that that we are looking at these different
That I,
alternatives.
okay.
Yeah, that's
Um,
fine. It's not-
Okay,
it's not
so we
hard.
had, if I recall correctly, let
2
me
and
just,
5.
Alternatives.
2,
And we'll educate.
5, 7, and I think it's 4. Yeah, those are the ones that we're recommending.
That we.
Yeah, in your slide deck,
and-
so.
Okay.
2, 5, 4.
Well, I think the flowers on a raised curve.
Next
a
time
lot
we'll make the
safer
pictures even
having the
prettier.
Ballards.
So
Well,
I think 7's fine, but I think you can't have the bike lanes on one side. You gotta have one bike, you gotta
Yeah.
have a bike lane on each side.
I do too.
Yeah.
I do too.
Okay, so if you'd like a bike lane on each side, then that would be closer to,
No,
But
that's
an
just 7 moving the
asymmetrical
bike
number of
lanes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
there's-
just
Okay.
move the
Keep 7
bike,
and
one of
move
the
the
bike
bike
lanes
lane.
over.
we'll take a look at that. We'll,
Sidewalks on
we'll try
the
and
side.
take a look and see if that works.
Okay,
All right,
Great.
great job.
Okay,
had enough feedback?
I think so.
Ready to move on? Thank you all so much. Move on to our final item, which is, also, Robert, you gotta reset yourself here.
Okay,
Um,
well, first I'll say thank you.
you're very welcome. Thank you.
Okay,
Direction and feedback regarding traffic studies and recommendations.
Guys,
And so the recommendation is we're giving feedback and direction to staff regarding prioritization of traffic improvements. My quick question is, does this relate to page 43 of 45 in our book, in our agenda packet? Because you do have a summary with bullet points on page 43 at the bottom.
your summary prioritization.
Is that what we're going to be choosing from?
well,
Focusing on?
let me highlight and then you can provide, I'm going to say that I'm going to give a really short presentation. So over the last several years, I think at this point it's probably dating back almost 10 years, we've had a variety of different studies that have provided us with input in terms of things that we should be doing.
Okay.
We take that information, we bring it to you. We then develop our CIP based on your feedback and priorities. And so we have accomplished a lot and we continue to do a lot of work in terms of implementing these things. And so we're coming back to you saying, we have all of these things. We've started ticking a lot off and we're asking you to help us prioritize our next level of effort.
I ask a quick question.
Yeah.
It is 4:42
Yeah.
and we have to shut down at 5. Do we
Mhm.
really think we can get to this?
I know, that's.
Well-
my
This is
concern
like a
too.
lot, this is something we should spend time on. I was just wondering if this, sorry, George, I know. But
If you want to, I absolutely agree. You need a lot more background and discussion on this because we're really trying to focus in on what we're going to be putting in our CIP
this is a big
every
deal.
year. that we've been following these master plans all along. And if it's not where the council wants to go, we need to know that
Yeah.
so we can
All right.
pull things back.
Well, then
So
let's
if we need to
continue.
move it to another meeting to have that in-depth conversation, we'll do that.
Well, let's do that.
So that's why I wanted to say, hone in on these, the following recommendations are made to assist in the prioritization, which is page 6 of 8 on
Right.
your, or page 43 in your book. Have they been summarized?
Yeah, because a
No,
lot
that's
of the
what-
stuff before you already got in work.
Yeah, no, we've done a lot, as I said, I mean, and we continue to do efforts. And so we have current efforts on Alameda and on Selby. We are implementing the neighborhood traffic management plan. we're just finishing up Valparaiso. You've identified the need for updating the master plan, and so that'll be coming for you to approve a contract soon. And I think that what we're looking for is, there's a lot going on right now. It's really, where do we want to go next that we need your feedback on? And so, as George said, there were a lot of studies. But we're going to start embarking on trying to put together the CIP in the early part of next year. And so whether through this venue or otherwise, if we can get what your priorities are for us to try and plan out, that's what we're trying to
And
do.
you'll see some of these things in those bullet points coming before you soon, like the bike ped master plan, as you mentioned. Local safety corridor identification, that's been through Transportation Committee. That's going to come to you in November. You'll see the, you just saw the El Camino Complete Streets
Right.
gap project. So you're going to see those things in those bullet points moving along. But as Robert mentioned, it's what's next. We're going to need to update our master
We need to
plans.
cover the channel
Fun.
I'm not in favor. of that.
and make
Big
it,
pipe.
We had a chance to do that. We had a
Put it
chance to
on
do
Watkins,
that.
yeah.
You voted against
But-
it. And then immediately you said we need to cover it at an additional $1 million after we had decided to leave it open.
This is where that garbage money could have been a
Come
whole channel of
on.
coverage, guys. This is
No,
it. This is what we're talking about.
stuff, yes.
The garbage money couldn't have touched the pipe.
I agree, but I'm just saying,
But
you
we
know.
did, we built the channel remodel with a lip high enough
Yes, we
to
did.
cover it, because you can't completely cover it because there's little creatures that need to be able to get up and out. And
You are correct.
I am.
You are correct with that. But you're not correct. You were the one that made the big deal how we needed to have the open thing, because there was, Mr. Dobby and myself wanted to put in the box culvert, which would have
I think
had
Jim wanted
cover,
a
and then
big
we could have
pipe.
put bike
Wanted
lanes
a
on
big
top.
pipe. No, yeah.
But that is
So
a
in the
different
interest of time,
discussion.
though, we can have this at another meeting.
Let's do that, okay?
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Shall we?
Vice
call
Mayor
for-
Lou?
Yes,
Just because we did open this item, can you please ask?
Public
Yes, thank you.
shall we ask for public comment on this item since we did
Well,
open
we
it for
haven't.
discussion?
You're going to continue it.
See if we're going to
Yeah,
continue.
we're going to continue it, so.
Okay,
So we'll
everybody,
continue.
anyone online? No. Okay,
I
so
have
let's
it.
close public
Here.
comment. We're gonna
Motion
continue
to
on-
adjourn.
Well, you might have somebody
Thanks,
here.
Mona.
Going to continue this item. Oh, wait, Jerry, did you want to? You'll have another opportunity.
They'll bring it.
I'm going out of town.
Oh, it's
Yeah,
not going to
no,
happen.
It's not going to happen tomorrow.
It's not going to happen until
You'll be back.
next week.
Next year.
Okay,
I mean,
Motion to adjourn.
this could go in front of the
Second.
transportation committee.
okay. Motion to adjourn, second. Okay.
Okay, all right.